Now, surely this has never happened to you. You've never driven by a property or been performing an inspection on an occupied property only to discover that the tenant, of all things, went out and snuck in an unauthorized pet. The nerve of that tenant. Can you believe it? Ridiculous. Never happens, does it? Every once in a great while, it does happen. So let me give you a couple tips on things to do when you find that tenant with an unauthorized pet. And number one is do not get angry. Now, stay with me here, because this is a big deal. I find so many PMs get so upset, offended, mad that the tenant would have the nerve to go out and get a pet and sneak that pet in and not call us. And maybe they were trying to be sneaky, but maybe they just kind of didn't think about it. Maybe they just saw the cute little puppy in the window and their kids want it and they got it for their kid. Calm down, all right? We're property managers. We're big boys and big girls. Don't get offended. If you get offended that easily, you're in the wrong business, all right? Take a deep breath. Talk to them like human beings. Don't get mad. Don't get angry. Take a deep breath. Assume that they just went out and got a pet and they kind of didn't want to tell you about it for whatever reason, and deal with it as a professional. Don't call them angry. So that's number one. Do not get angry. Number two, before you call them, decide if you want to consider allowing it. Maybe that property does consider allowing pets, or it does allow pets. Well, then maybe you want to allow them to continue keeping that pet, but make that decision before you go banging on their door or make the phone call or serve the notice. Do you want to allow them to stay with the pet, especially if they're a good tenant? Number three, contact the tenant. Remember, you're going to do it kindly. Contact the tenant and schedule an inspection. So your phone call is going to sound something like this. Hey, Mr. Tenant, we were driving by the property the other day and noticed that there's a cat in the window. What? Tenant says, I don't know what you're talking about. Yeah, well, the lease agreement actually doesn't allow for cats. Now, we may be able to allow you to keep the pet, but we would have to come in and do a property inspection and then have some paperwork done in order to allow you to keep that pet. So you want to be reasonable. You want to be rational with the tenant. So call the tenant up. You're going to want to go in and do an inspection. Now, hopefully your lease agreement has a clause as it relates to pets. If you want to see what our clause is, go back and watch our video on top 5 lease agreement clauses. We give the actual language we use as it relates to pets. But we're going to come in, we're going to do an inspection. We're going to charge them for that because it's time. We're going to do an inspection on the property. Now, if we do an inspection and we determine that it's okay, we want them to stay because we don't want to evict them over the pet. And that's the decision you have to make next. Are you going to require them to get rid of the pet? Or are you going to allow them to potentially keep the pet? If you're going to require them to keep the pet, you want to use a pet addendum. So now you're going to build that pet addendum into the lease. You should have a pet addendum in place for your company. There should probably be a fee charged to the tenant to keep this pet. Why? Because it's time out of your day that you're having to have this conversation, do this inspection. The pet addendum is going to outline aspects of them keeping the pet. So they're going to apply for the pet. If you approve it, you're going to sign a pet addendum with us. Now, if you determine, no, I'm sorry, this is an absolute no pet property, we can't make an exception for the fact that I like you got to get rid of this pet. If that's the case, my recommendation is this: be reasonable, okay? They're not going to have it gone tomorrow morning, all right? Give them reasonable amount of time, whatever you determine and they determine that to be, to move the pet out of the property. Because look, if you like pets, they're part of the family, aren't they? It's hard to get rid of a pet. So be reasonable. Try to let that tenant, especially if it's a good tenant, try to let them keep that. If you're, as a landlord, if you're letting your tenants have pets, they're not going to move as often because it's hard to find landlords that take pets. So they'll probably stay with you longer. They'll pay their rent on time, more likely. And as long as it's not some big, scary, nasty pet that's going to destroy the yard and the inside, consider allowing it. But be reasonable with the tenant. That's what makes you being a good landlord. We like pets. We want to encourage our tenants, properly speaking, to bring pets because we know they're going to stay longer with a solid pet addendum. We can charge a little bit more rent. It's a win-win truly for everybody when you have a strong pet policy in place.